A 28-year-old mom died on the operating table after taking abortion pills. Are pro-life laws and President Trump to blame? You'd certainly think so if you listen to the media and Kamala Harris. But we explain how the facts clearly show otherwise. Plus, a Virginia Senator, Mark Peake, exposes a sham government hearing on the pro-Hamas college protests. Welcome to Speak Up, Virginia, equipping you to speak up on the life, family, and freedom issues that matter most to you. From the Family Foundation, I'm your host, Candi Victoria, with our president, Victoria Cobb. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you with us for Speak Up, Virginia. And this week we are going to address a really heartbreaking topic, but I think we need to tackle it because we need to get at what is at the root of the issue and the lies that have been out there surrounding this. And what I'm talking about is something that you've probably seen in your newsfeed lately, and that's this tragic death of a 28-year-old mom. She was just vibrant, mother of a 6-year-old boy, otherwise healthy, but she died very soon after taking abortion pills. Now, sadly, this has been pretty overtly turned into a campaign issue by the Harris campaign, and the media has been coming alongside that whole thing and just putting out what I would say are outright lies about this whole issue. And, for one thing, they've been saying this death can be blamed on pro-life laws and Trump, while saying absolutely nothing about the abortion industry that pushes we know about the risky abortion pills onto women without really good follow-up. So we're going to talk about what happened, what's the truth in all this. But before we get into all that, Victoria, can you help us understand what happened to this mom?
Yeah. So, this is just a devastating story. The way ProPublica reports it, they basically say this is a woman, this is back in 2022. She found herself pregnant with twins. And the way they kind of describe it is she was just getting her footing in life. So she was just moved out of her family's house to kind of live by herself with this child or, set up shop herself. Mm-hmm. And she was planning to get a nursing degree. It sounds like she was really trying to make it independently as an unmarried woman. And I'm not really sure all the circumstances because we don't get every detail. But for whatever reason, she obviously did not feel that she could carry these twins to term and decided to have an abortion. Now, what's important is she's in Georgia. And in Georgia, they have a law that prohibits abortions after the heartbeat is detected. And so but they have exceptions. So with the exception of medical emergencies, rape and incest. So that's the law in the state where she is. And so usually that's happening around 6 weeks. People refer to it as the 6-week law occasionally when you hear about it in the news. So she was 9 weeks and decided, at this point, she decided she needed to travel to North Carolina to obtain the abortion. But she actually missed her appointment, and the abortion clinic then decided to give her chemical abortion pills.
Yeah, and I read somewhere that this abortion clinic she was trying to get to in North Carolina gave her just 15 more minutes to get there for this, I guess it was a surgical abortion procedure, and she was in traffic, so she missed that slot. And so then when she got there, apparently they just threw these abortion pills at her and advised her to, use this alternative. And I'm not saying in any way that the surgical procedure is better, but clearly, it doesn't seem like there was a whole lot of care, support, and follow-up going on here when you're giving someone a certain amount of time and just take this pill,
I just want to remind people when you do surgery outside, something other than abortion, half the time you're there at registration hours before the actual event. This whole story just reminds me about how callously I think the industry takes even the surgical abortion, and then we'll get to how they handle these chemical pills. But basically, a few days after she took the pill regimen, she started experiencing painful complications, and that's where this story turns really even more tragic. So it turns out that her body had not been able to expel the entirety of the baby tissue, and so she ends up in an emergency room. And as we know from statistics, that there are thousands of women that take these pills and end up in the emergency room. So this is actually happening. This is not an abnormal, I hate to say it, percentage-wise, situation with these chemical abortions. And so she ends up in the emergency room. And at this point, the twins are no longer living. They don't have a heartbeat. And all the hospital has to do to help her is basically do an emergency D&C. So remove the body tissue from her body. And this is something that Georgia's law makes clear is legal, because again, the abortion ban applies to living babies. These are very clear distinctions between, is the baby alive, is the baby not alive, what a hospital can do. And so this was an emergency resulting from a death that had already happened in the womb.
Yeah, it's clear it's not living babies at that point, and obviously there's not a heartbeat, and it's a medical emergency.
Correct.
So there's no reason they shouldn't have been able to help her.
Correct.
But despite all of that, she is literally left waiting there for 20 hours. I think they gave her an antibiotic or something, but not doing anything else. And she's in just waiting in a suburban Atlanta hospital. And I'm just going to read this horrible report from ProPublica. It says, quote, Thurman waited in pain in a hospital bed, worried about what would happen to her 6-year-old son. As doctors monitored her infection spreading, her blood pressure sinking, and her organs beginning to fail, it took 20 hours for doctors to finally operate. By then, it was too late, and she died on the operating table.
This is nothing other than a tragedy, and it is stunning that this gets turned into a campaign situation, because truly just talking about this is hard, and all the mistakes that were made along the way by the medical facility. And I think the obvious is you've got this emergency and you've got someone sitting there 20 hours before they're receiving care in an ER.
And to be clear, the actual documentation from medical experts looking into this, they have not gotten a reason that this happened at the time we were recording this, even though people are out there saying that they know why the doctors did this. But really, we don't know why it looks like that kind of negligence was happening. But what's maddening about the reporting of all this is just really the outright lies and clear twisting of a tragic death for political purposes. And I'm just going to go back to the MSNBC story that we flashed up on the screen earlier. And I want to read from the first line of the article, just so you can see what I'm talking about with the media bias. And I guess this is an opinion from someone at MSNBC News, but it says, if the Christian right had not had its way at the Supreme Court, Amber Nicole Thurman would be alive today. So, that's quite the broad statement. But then it goes on, and it says, the true crime is that Thurman's life was cut short because of ideologues who for 50 years trumpeted biblical values as they sought to make women pay for unwanted pregnancies. That's the true crime, Victoria.
It's really hard to know even where to start with what is being accused in this article and what is actually true. So they are purposely ignoring the real story here, which is that there is a documented risk to taking abortion pills. It is known, and it is known to the point where the FDA has a warning label for these drugs, and it discloses that between 3 and 5% of medication abortion patients will seek emergency treatment. That basically that this is a reality for a percentage of people. This is not a one-off extreme outlier. And so that's being completely ignored. And what happens is you end up in a medical emergency due to infection or due to prolonged bleeding.
This is on the warning label.
This is on the warning label.
Yeah.
And this is what, this has been frequently talked about by the pro-life community as we've dealt with this chemical abortion thing. And when you think about the nearly 643,000 chemical abortions happening in the United States in just 2023, so just look at that. That equates to approximately 20,000 emergency room visits. And nearly 20% of the women that are taking the abortion pills experience some type of complication, according to medical data that comes out of Europe. So we don't have all the data, but we have that.
Yeah.
So we know this is happening.
And think about the fact that we're not hearing about those thousands of other women because they don't fit the political case that's being, trying to be made here. Those women, we need to say their names.
Yeah.
Also.
There's no question. And we've talked about one on this show before. Yeah. Maybe you can remind people. Do you want to remind people the details there?
We talked about 24-year-old, I really want to try to get her name right, Aleona Dixon, died less than a week after taking a prescribed abortion pill. And you don't hear much about that. Another thing that they're not talking about at all is this recent Supreme Court case, this case that went to the Supreme Court where they were challenging the FDA rushing the process on this pill.
This is the problem. We know that what the FDA approved these pills for originally has been completely altered by the Biden administration. So remember, these pills were not intended for late use by the FDA late in the pregnancy. 9 weeks was not when they were intended to be used. And so what we had is an administration that took off all those regulations. And that's how we ended up with the Supreme Court case related to we need to put these safety regulations back on as the FDA originally as the studies originally tested for.
And I heard someone else reporting that the original regulations included that there should be ultrasounds maybe before and after. And something like that, if there had been an ultrasound after, that would have saved her life, I think.
This gets to the broader issue that they want to treat abortion like it is a mainstay, that it is like taking a Tylenol, that it is no big deal, has no safety risks. When organizations like ours and others in other states have put forward safety standards around abortion at all, and we've said, look, this is a medical procedure. Abortion shouldn't be held in isolation from what we do with every other medical procedure. We should have things like ultrasounds. I mean, that was a very hot issue here in Virginia. And the reason is because the doctor needs to know, if nothing else, whether we agree or disagree on whether she should be taking that human life, the doctor has to know what he's dealing with. And they have to know, for example, in a chemical abortion, did it actually do this safely? And so, yes, I mean, they fight the regulations and then they come out with these stories that are tragic and try to use them to say we need, guess what, less regulations.
And in Virginia, they removed everything.
They wiped out that.
I'm talking about abortion in general, not just the pill.
Yeah, they removed all regulations. We had safety standards. We had just the basic idea that you should make sure an ultrasound is done so a woman knows what she's dealing with. A doctor has the safety. I mean, there's safety complications that show up in the ER because women have ectopic pregnancies. They didn't know were ectopic. They went to go do an abortion. I mean, there are real problems that when you don't have safety around these things get even worse for the woman, right? Like we know this is a life and death situation for the unborn child, but it should not be a life and death situation for the woman.
They get treated or not treated, but they're trying to handle an abortion and it's actually an ectopic pregnancy.
But you don't know that because you haven't done an ultrasound. Yeah. It's a self-reported. So when a woman goes in an abortion center, if she is not given an ultrasound, the doctor is taking her word for how far the gestation is, not looking at anything and not knowing. Wow. You may not even know there's twins. I mean, in this case, she clearly, it says that she did, but you may not know. And you're handing them chemical abortions based on what? And so the before and I would argue after, especially in chemical abortions, because we know there's this percentage where it doesn't always do it safely.
Well, and it's especially just dishonest to just be putting these headlines out there. This is Trump's fault, because I just do have to say, to balance out the biased reporting, that the Biden-Harris administration, it's their FDA that reversed all these regulations.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable to me that things can be so distorted. If you don't look at this situation and also realize that something dangerous was happening, and there was and the hospital reacted wrong, right? That there was actual malpractice going on by leaving her for 20 hours. If that isn't the crux of this story, you've missed. You've buried the lead, so to speak. You're missing the entire point. I
would go even further and say you're also harming women as a media institution.
Oh, well, I mean, literally
report it like this. And don't talk about
the state of Florida just issued a memo to all of its physicians. This is not that a DNC after an abortion has taken place is medical care that needs to happen. Like they had to clarify. These laws are clear, but because we're making a political issue, it's muddying things for people, for physicians that know better. But all this dialogue is actually making it worse.
Yeah. Well, let's get more into what Kamala Harris was saying about all this. And at the time we were taping this, she was set to make this a big campaign speech in Georgia because that is a battleground state. But she also put out a statement, again, as we said, blaming this death on so-called Trump abortion bans and talking about, quote, women are bleeding out in the parking lots, turned away from emergency rooms, losing their ability to ever have those children again. And then she says, these are the consequences of Donald Trump's actions. And then she also said a statement at another event. Let's just listen to a clip of that.
Most recent stories about what happened in Georgia. Many of these Trump abortion bans that make no exception for rape or incest, it's immoral. It's immoral. And today, 40% of Latinas in America live in a state with a Trump abortion ban. So imagine if she is a working woman. Understand that the majority of women who seek abortion care are mothers.
All right, I'm kind of confused here. Did I just hear her say the majority of women who seek abortion care are mothers?
First of all, I'd like to say every woman who has a pregnancy is a mom. It's actually 100% of someone who, unless they're seeking abortion and actually are wrong about being pregnant, but it's basically 100% of women are already moms.
I mean, talk about ignoring the reality there.
Yes. I suppose what she was trying to say is have other children already, in their family. But that is, first of all, just for every mom who is pregnant right now, who is loving on their child and going to give birth to this child, you are a mom. Do not let Kamala Harris act like you are not. Like you are already taking care of that baby. You are already eating the right things and doing the right things to take care of that baby. So that's very frustrating. And also, I have to note, when the left blames President Trump for this, it's remarkable to me. What they're actually saying is he appointed originalists to the Supreme Court, who those people, in viewing the decision that was Roe, said, no, this has to be overturned. Donald Trump didn't actually himself do anything. He appointed judges. They came to a legal decision based on what they knew about the law. So I just always find it remarkable that they make it sound like he stroked the law or he himself went in and told the doctors what to do in these situations.
I'm just going to say it's especially remarkable since he was just under fire with the whole pro-life community for not supporting all these abortion bans. And they just go ahead like it's not even happening, calling it Trump abortion bans. Yes. It's crazy.
Yes.
It's like they're in a different reality.
Yeah. That's like saying every president is responsible for every decision that comes out if they had any appointments to this U.S. Supreme Court. I would argue that is not how that rolls in reality. So it's just, the whole thing is absurd for her to blame Trump, to her referring to the Trump bans. And I agree with what the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYN said. They actually said that this death was caused by side effects of legal abortion drugs and medical negligence, not pro-life laws. That's the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Well, Victoria, what do people do with all this? I mean, first I just want to say we have to recognize we are in a spiritual battle, and I don't think we want to be we want to be supportive of these women. We don't want to make the women the one that we're judging here, or because I think even from this case, you can see they need support coming alongside them. I think in a lot of these cases, women, we've seen from statistics, was that the one where it was 70% that the majority of women would actually like to become a parent? They just need the support systems around them. So we need to remember that we're in a spiritual battle, that our spiritual enemy wants to destroy the lives of women and children. And we're in a battle for their lives and their souls. For them to know the love of God, for these children to have a future, for the moms to have a future. Well,
and we know that God can be glorified in the worst of circumstances. And so we want her life to bring meaning. And what really I hope the takeaway for women is that it helps clarify that these pills are dangerous, that this is not the best thing for you. Like I hope in this they can get the truth that when you've had the left literally sitting outside the Supreme Court taking abortion pills like they're candy. Yes. That is what's harming women. And I just hope this story, as awful as it is, at least has a few people going, taking pause, who might be thinking about taking the life of their child, especially this way, and think there's got to be something better. There might be a support system around. There might be a pregnancy resource center that could walk me through this. Like, I want so much for that to be the takeaway from this tragic loss. And I want hospitals to clean up their act. I mean, nobody should be left in an ER. It's
ridiculous.
That's just my, if you've ever had a bad experience in a hospital, you sort of feel for, just we got work to do there in general also.
Yeah, it's the abortion pill. It's not penicillin. It's not Tylenol, like the left is always out there saying. But how do people counteract the lies that are out there like that, with this being said over and over in the media? What can people do to counter with the truth here? Well,
most importantly, we have to constantly put out in our social networks, in our churches, and that there are places of support. Like we have to constantly push that message that in fact women have better alternatives. I think of her plan in Virginia here, where you can literally just go on the website and just look anywhere. Where are their diapers? Where is their food? Where can I go somewhere to find housing? Like, we've got to put that out there so women stop believing the lie that this is the best alternative for them. And so I think that's actually probably the principal thing we need to do to combat the lies. Is it is not hopeless when you feel like you've found yourself in an unplanned pregnancy and this was not the future that you envisioned for yourself. I don't want people to believe the lie that the left is telling them, that is hopeless and your only solution is a very dangerous chemical abortion pill.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, we do need to move on to another topic today, and it's not at that level of heartbreaking, but I will say this is still outrageous. Yeah. So just bring us up to speed on this craziness going on in the Senate committee hearing in Virginia.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot in the past about kind of how there have been these protests across campus on this issue of Hamas and Palestine and all of that, and these anti-Semitic protests specifically. And so basically, as a result of that, there's been this hostile environment for Jewish students and professors to be able to get to their class. All these things have been going on. And so basically, in response, a lot of Virginia colleges have actually improved their regulations about how you protest, encampments, masks, things like that.
Throwing things at the police.
Yes, they've kind of set down some parameters, which you'd think should have been in place long before we ended up in the situation that we've seen with these protests. But nevertheless, so they've tightened up the parameters in some of these Virginia colleges, and now there's been this outcry from the left that these common sense measures basically trample on free speech is sort of the claim. And so as a result, Senator Hashmi, who is one of the most leftist, radical members of our General Assembly, who seems have in the past has seemed to be very sympathetic to this kind of thing, decided to hold a committee hearing on this whole issue. And I want to note what she called it at one point in the hearing, a fact-finding hearing. So anyway, you'll know why that's relevant in a minute. But the only problem is that during this hearing, so they brought in, some of these people, gave them an opportunity to express their concerns. They also had testifying some of the professors, or not professors, the people in charge of the regulations at the different colleges. So they also testified. And basically, during the hearing, they completely shut out the free speech of the conservative senators and their ability to actually get to the truth, to actually find the facts, as I would like to note, because there were people who would put forward what they felt might be half-truths, and they wanted to ask questions, and they were not permitted to get at these outrageous lies.
And to that point, before this hearing even began, there were complaints that they didn't invite people from the Jewish community. Law
enforcement was a big one missing from the whole hearing. You're doing a hearing on how this has been going, and you don't include the side that's actually having to interface with these difficult protests.
Wasn't this was hours?
Yes.
And people are out there throwing out police brutality, and you don't invite the police. So it was crazy.
Yeah, before the meeting even started, it was sort of like, why are these people not going to be represented, at the hearing? Did you explicitly go out and invite these people? And there were really lame reasons brought back by the senator about why, the police were not specifically told to be there to talk about these kind of things. So anyway, it was ridiculous.
Well, if you were watching this whole thing, you saw a room full of people wearing the black and white scarves, that indicate support, and a lot of masks. I always think that's interesting. Every time we have hearings where left-wing people come out from academia, there's always a lot of masks. So it was interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, the students basically would go up and kind of put these horrible accusations out, not only against Israel, but also against our law enforcement. I mean, that's essentially the kinds of testimony that they were listening to, that they wanted to ask questions about.
Well, it seemed like watching this whole thing, the primary purpose was to just open up this forum for this point of view to get out there. But it makes it feel very one-sided when you don't allow any questions, any challenges to really kind of flesh things out.
These senators wanted to ask questions to get to the bottom of what's happening on campus, and they were not allowed. And that just begs the question, why? If you go to any legislative hearing at the General Assembly, there's a Q&A that happens. It is often somebody testifies, and they actually right after that ask the speaker a direct question, or they let all the speakers go and then they allow a period of time for questions. None of that. And so it is so abnormal the way she structured this that you have to ask, what was the motivation?
Especially when they were in there for hours. But tell us about the conservative senators that tried to buck this.
Yeah, we're super thankful for our senators, Senator Newcraig, Senator Durant, and especially Senator Peake, who basically pointed out the irony that you have this hearing on free speech and you're not allowing free speech. So they were very strong, and they stood their ground and demanded that as our elected officials trying to get the bottom of something, they have to be able to do that.
And that's Senator Mark Peake from Lynchburg.
Yeah.
And he had a great exchange. Let's just listen to that.
So, Madam Chair, just to let me clarify, we're having a hearing today starting at 2:30, probably go to about 5:30 or 6 on free speech. And then we're going to have individuals speak to us about their free speech, but the senators, who represent 210,000 people in the Commonwealth, are prohibited from free speech and asking questions of the witnesses here today. Is that correct?
Senator Peake, we are not stifling your speech. You're able to articulate any questions, any concerns you have. We will simply not be engaging in a back and forth with individuals who are here to speak about their personal experiences. But you have been given ample opportunity to voice your discontent at this point, and we've made note of it. And your speech is not being stifled, but when you have the questions, please articulate them so that we may direct them to organizations and to institutions so that we can proceed in thinking about policy changes.
So basically what she's telling him is, you can ask questions, but you can't get answers, and they're just going to be able to take back and carefully craft a politically written response.
It's like a letter writing campaign back and forth. We're going to let them testify verbally here. You can't ask them questions, but we'll hold on to your questions. We'll send them in, and then they'll send back answers. Why? Any rational person thinks, well, this is dumb, and it allows them to, I would argue, instead of actually answering the question on the fly, you're having to frame, and you've got the lawyers back at the...
Totally.
I mean, it's just, it's ridiculous. So anyway, it just gives the college leaders time to skirt, if they want to, or sort of spin, or, I mean, the bottom line is, they should be asked questions about what they said. They just gave a testimony. That's the moment that at any other legislative hearing in the Virginia General Assembly, that's when they're going to be able to be asked a question.
Well, and to give an example, there was, I think, a college leader that talked about Jewish students being offended by chants that were being yelled out by the protesters. And Senator Peake asked an obvious question, what were the chants? And he was shut down.
That's right. So we now know this happened, but we don't actually know what actually was said. Because it would matter, right? It does matter if I'm generally espousing my political views versus I'm saying something hateful towards you. Those are two totally different kinds of speech, and we do actually handle them differently depending on how severe and where it goes. So it's absurd.
Yeah,
so
especially if it's code for eradicating a people group.
Yes, if you are trying to, yes, absolutely.
Well, I also noticed Senator Hashmi was saying, well, they're sharing their personal experiences. But it did seem like several people went a lot broader than personal experience. It did get political. So I don't know if this clip we're about to play perfectly exhibits that, but it's interesting because there's another exchange with Senator Peake. So let's just play that for a minute.
On Monday, April 29th, the 206th night in the ongoing genocide, 3 police forces brutalized the people present at VCU's encampment, a peaceful protest with the aim to pressure the university to divest from Israel. VCU representatives claimed to want to steer away from a hostile environment, but they were the one who created it. The violence present was state-sanctioned.
Madam Chair, they could speak.
My time be paused?
Madam Chair.
My time be paused?
Yes,
Thank you.
But we don't have to sit and use the phrases of murder and genocide. And I just note the objection. I have the right to object to that. I do object to that. But I don't have the right to ask her questions.
Freedom of speech.
And this came after Hamas on October 7th murdered 1,100 innocent Israelis. And to come in here and talk about genocide and I can't ask questions.
I mean, obviously, when you have really overwhelmingly one-sided comments that aren't able to ever be responded to, so it's just ridiculous. It invites the charge that Peake is trying to make that this is a sham hearing, that this isn't an actual fact-finding investigation. There's no real purpose. It's like these senators were brought here to just sit. I mean, they could watch it on TV. They don't need to be there. They don't get to interact.
What do you call those kind of hearings in communist country? A show trial?
Like a monkey
I guess
a trial.
Like it's like not a trial, but it's like a show hearing.
Yeah, it's like to put a front on, but it's not real, and everybody knew it wasn't real. So it just is very frustrating. And then there was this rabbi that tried to speak, and his comments got, I guess, a little more political, and she gets right on him that it has to be, personal. Personally, I don't really even understand why. I mean, the bottom line is you're at the General Assembly. Your comments are your comments. I actually don't think on either
free
side.
Speech.
I really don't think on either side you should be saying it has to come out of personal experience. It can't be about the broader topic because the broader topic is what's driving. Right. And then when this rabbi started to speak, I mean,
because he wanted to respond.
Right. And the room is erupting behind him. They're going nuts. And,
well, let's just watch that for a minute.
It is personal. David Asher, Rabbi, Knesset Beth Israel. It isn't bad enough they scream Genocide Joe, Killer Kamala, try to physically drag Tim Kaine from the hotel, storm our Capitol when Netanyahu spoke, throw fireworks at our police. 7.5 out of 9 million Jews from Christian Europe, 900,000 out of 1 million driven from Muslim countries last century. October 7th, 1,200 were raped, burned, murdered in a genocide. Supposed to be 40 million. Can you pause, please? Can I have my time?
Rabbi Asher.
It's gonna be directed, obviously.
Rabbi Asher, if the audience is not going to be quiet, we will be clearing the individuals. I ask you to remain quiet. Rabbi Asher, please go immediately to your personal experiences.
Okay, I think it is fair to say that Senator Hashmi is not a neutral moderator. It seems like he was the only speaker that actually was explicitly tasked by Hashmi to keep it personal. So that just, speaks for itself. But Victoria, why do you think, what was she trying to do with this whole thing?
Yeah, I think that the point is this was her trying to exert an outcome, not just go to find facts. And I would argue that we need to note that she is a candidate for lieutenant governor on the Democratic side. And there is a portion of that party that is extremely pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine, the whole 9 yards. And this whole hearing felt like an appeasement to that group. I'm not going to say that was her motivation, but I'm going to say that that's what it felt like when you watched it go down.
Okay, just on an off note here, a totally random note. I just can't help but notice how when leftists kind of do these things, just the way leftists operate in general, I'm watching the conservatives that seem to be having this natural emotion. They're really just kind of expressing themselves, their frustration. And then you see Senator Hashmi, she looks so robotic.
Yeah, she does. I mean, it's like, let me pretend that there's not real passion around this and just this is the rules and this is how it's going to go. And I mean, it's astonishing that you can treat your fellow senators that way. I would say it is astonishing. These are colleagues. These are peers. Okay, she's the chairman of the committee, but the bottom line is they walked into a hearing where it is not operating like a normal hearing, and there's really no point in them being there because they can do a letter exchange at some other time if that's all this is.
Can I just say, it reminded me of being on the phone with a customer service. We've all had those experiences, and it's something ridiculous that should be made right, and they're on the other line. Yes, I understand your concern.
Yeah.
That's what it was like.
That was what it was like.
I'm just going to say. But bringing it back to a practical level here, What can people do coming out of this? Should they ask for another committee hearing where all sides are included, where there's invites out to everybody involved in this? Is there legislation where we can help our Jewish students feel safe? What do you think?
That's exactly the problem. Is there was legislation. The Democrats wouldn't even hear in committee this past legislative session. And what it was things like, we're not going to fund universities that allow anti-Semitism. I mean, it's in broad brush strokes. And they would not even give that a hearing. And so at this point, and you see this fact-finding hearing was in the same vein of, we're not going to let the other side out. We're not going to talk about the fact that there's actually anti-Semitic things happening on our college campuses. And so bottom line is, people have to put pressure. We have to put pressure on the legislators to bring forward these bills again. I'm proud that some put them forward even if they didn't get a hearing. So we've got to push on that. And we've got to think, especially if you've got a student at one of these college campuses that they've actually revised their policies, we've got to be thanking the president, thanking the Board of Visitors, thanking the governor for having put on a good Board of Visitors. I mean, there's a lot of people who have done right in trying to improve the situation for people who were in hostile environments trying to just get their education.
All right, well, that wraps up our topics for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Remember, we are stronger when we speak together. And if you want to help us get the word out, share our playlist, our Speak Up Virginia playlist, and we'll see you next time.